All right. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, to the Wombo Combo podcast on a Wednesday evening. A little unique here, middle of the week podcast. Obviously, there's a lot going on right now, so things got postponed on myself. I had some casting to do with the major qualifiers. We're going to talk about that plenty here on this podcast. And then later this week, the minor qualifiers. Of course, both tomorrow and Friday will resume. So, yeah, a big week goes without saying. Of course, on top of all of that, we do have the new patch that everyone's playing on. We'll definitely give our insight there later on in the show as well. But I'm BreakyCPK, of course, joined by my beautiful co-host, Banana Slam Jamma. How's it going, man?
I'm beautiful. I'm doing good, man. Just watching a bit of the qualifiers here. Obviously, the EG versus Fighting Pandas for the last NA slot for the majors going on right now. So we're going to know the result of that possibly by the end of this podcast if EG were to take it 2-0. But I'm just loving the new patch. I've lost like 500 MMR so far. So I am playing a new role overall because I'm playing a tournament coming up as an offlaner. So it's been rough to adjust to a new patch as offlane because a lot of the heroes that are like coming into the meta, like Venomancer, potentially these Bat Riders, haven't really played them too much in the offlane prior to now. So it's been a rough adjustment period. But overall, loving the new patch, all the wonky stuff going on, and just nice to have a nice refreshing Dota that we talked about wanting to have last week.
Yeah, we gave our predictions, I guess you could say, in a sense of what the patch would be. And I think one of the biggest things we were certainly right on was the idea of some kind of new thing to go for, new objective. That's what I was looking for. New objective within the game, whether it was a new Roshan even or something extreme like that. And, well, there definitely was a new objective implemented with the outpost specifically, of course. And it certainly has made the game extra interesting, and that on top of the neutral items, I mean, there really is a lot there to talk about. I don't want to get too much into it. You can watch Purge's 9-hour plus podcast that he did.
If you really want to hear a lot of talking about that, I'm sure there's plenty of material outside of this podcast for exactly that.
By the way, the tournament that you're talking about, you're WESG, right?
Yeah, it's WSG. It's
you know like that I'm going to be there, right? Did you know that?
Are you really?
Yeah.
Are you like the official caster or something?
I'm casting it, yeah.
Nice. I did not know that.
Elevated and Tsunami. We're all
okay, cool. Well, there you go.
Yeah, so I guess I'll be seeing you soon enough. Over there in Montreal. Looking forward to that. Anywho, but enough about us. This isn't about us necessarily. There's, of course, the major qualifiers. As you mentioned, EG and FP, in fact, as we're recording this podcast live, is currently playing in their game number 2 with EG up 1-0. But all the regions to go over. That's what we're going to do. And later on in the show, in fact, hopefully within the next 5 to 10 minutes here, we're going to be joined by iNSaNiA from Team Liquid, the captain, of course. And spoiler alert, Liquid going undefeated in the European region in the major qualifiers. I did not see that coming, as much of a Liquid fan I am. But, hey, it's a new patch, and I think it's fair to say that they like it. Obviously, we'll talk to iNSaNiA about his thoughts there of their success and, of course, the patch in general. But, quick thoughts yourself, BSJ, on Liquid success?
Sadly, I didn't get to watch them at all during these qualifiers, but during the last major, they looked a lot more solid. And I was talking to Blitz back when we were there at ESL, and like he basically didn't seem nervous for them, even though I was, that they were going to be able to make turnaround like they have. He said that they're just a bunch of pub fiends, and if they're not spamming pubs, then they suck. That's basically what he said. But prior to the ESL, they hadn't been playing all that many pubs because they were taking a small break after TI, and clearly he was right because their success. I mean, they seem like a wild card type team, and they're probably the type of team that benefits from a new patch and just kind of doing their own thing when everyone else isn't exactly refined, because Liquid does create a lot of chaos. They do just like taking a ton of mid-game skirmishes, and I think overall they're one of the harder teams to play against, and I think in new patches that benefits you because the other teams are usually, I mean, almost every team is less methodical with their picks, with their approach to the game, all that kind of stuff, because they don't know exactly what's the best and exactly, what to play on the map. I mean, even like we just said with the outposts and stuff, those add so much nuance to map movements, map control, and a team like Liquid, who's kind of just all over the place, I think flourishes in that kind of setting. And it's really cool to see that they I mean, that's just really that's a hard region to go 10-0 in the qualifiers.
You think so? Yeah. It's crazy again to see that that's what they did, but sticking with that European region a little bit more. Of course, there's some other storylines there. The other two teams to qualify were both secret. Not a massive surprise there. They did end up dropping one game in the group stages to Viking.gg. A little bit interesting there, but again, a new patch. I certainly think you have to kind of keep reiterating and keep in mind, as there are other results elsewhere, and definitely we'll talk about those here coming up that certainly were surprising, no doubt. But then Secret had to defeat Nigma 2-1. Of course, that's a new ex-Liquid squad, Kuroki and crew. But then Alliance actually beat Nigma in the third-place match to send Alliance to the major, and Nigma is having to compete in the minor qualifiers now. But as we mentioned, I mean, this is a very tough region, of course, one of the best. There's no secret there. They got 3 spots, and I think that's not a big surprise to us necessarily. But you feel like, is this maybe Nigma in the sense of not really having the most playtime together in that tournament atmosphere? Are there excuses to be made here? Is Alliance, were they just the better team?
I think there's a lot of factors. I think Alliance and Liquid are both just, when I say Alliance and Liquid specifically, it's kind of like I think most people expected Nigma as well as Secret to be 2 of the 3 slots. So the fact that Liquid and Alliance are both making it through over Nigma is kind of the highlight of the story to be told here. I think that with so many factors like the new patch, I think Alliance and Liquid are not bad teams by any stretch. That those things combined with the fact that Nigma's also took a tournament off, they're not going to be as in peak form as the other teams are. Their peak form relative to what they could be, in comparison to what they are, is going to be different. So because of the fact that they didn't play together, I'm not going to look too much into it. I mean, they just got second place at TI, with that same roster. Yeah. And obviously Kuroki, one of the best captains in the world. I expect them to get top 2 at the minor, if not win it, and then, go from there. I'm not too concerned about them. I think if they were to lose to a team less worthy than Liquid or Alliance, I might have a little cause for concern. But new patches, so many things can go wrong or right, that it's not surprising to see all these high-placed finishers at the last major struggling to even get back to the major. Yeah. So that's what our goal was with the new patch, though, right? And that's why new patches are always so interesting, because it makes the pro scene and in Dota in general just much less predictable.
A lot of parity, and that's, as a spectator, we certainly appreciate that. So, again, the patch definitely playing its role. I will say Nigma, yes, losing to Alliance, maybe not that crazy considering their very recent success, but they did have to play a tiebreaker match, actually, against AdPhenom. AdPhenom, of course, coming off losing Madara, who ended up going elsewhere. Nataki stepping in, a Swedish player, not as familiar, but he steps in with the 4 Greeks, and they take Nigma, again, essentially to a tiebreaker match. Ultimately, Nigma did win that, of course, but AdPhenom may be one of the bigger surprises overall, even of the European stages, as they will now be playing in the minor qualifiers with Nigma, as well as Viking.gg and whoever else right there. So that's something else to look forward to when it comes to the European minor qualifiers and AdPhenom. But Nigma, no doubt, is the expected team, and I do think that, okay, especially now with you've had this major play, and I know it's only one double elimination tournament, even with the minor qualifiers for them, but Nigma should win the minor qualifiers. They should be the top dogs there, and that to me is where it'd be okay. What's going on here? They need to step it up, but obviously that's still to come. And of course, you can even make a run to the minor then, and then you still qualify for the major on top of that. So I do have those high expectations there for Nigma. As you mentioned, they are the runner-up after all when it comes to TI, but a little bit of a hiccup, not surprisingly, though, early on here. Something else. Okay, so let's kind of rewind a little bit, as I was hoping this would kind of lead into our guest, but unfortunately, I haven't heard from him just yet, so waiting to hear from iNSaNiA to be good to go there to bring him on. But going back a little bit, so we're talking about the European qualifiers, we're talking about Nigma. They're one of these teams that had to go through the open qualifiers. So there's a couple of talking points here that I want to go over, BSJ, and that the first one being, we talked about LGD, Secret, Nigma, as they're known now, and OG all did not play the first cycle, and as we come to find out, that means they had to then play the open qualifiers if they wanted to compete in the future cycles, which that in itself, I was personally a little bit caught off guard by, but the more I thought about it, I like the idea because it helps break up one season to the next, in my opinion. And I'm all for, yes, for the sake of competition, making sure you do have the top tier competition there. But when teams willingly take off a cycle when other teams are grinding and competing, that is their decision. And if that means that then the penalty is they have to play through an onslaught of best of ones into a final best of three, then in my mind, so be it. And that's obviously what these teams have to do. And we did see that come as a factor specifically for LGD, who got knocked out in the China qualifiers. OG, by the way, did not compete, as if you probably are aware by now. They actually sent a secondary team, and I guess you could say an OG seed, players like Z-Freak, Chessie, and crew. They ended up losing to Nigma in the final match in a best of three. But again, that's what happens when you don't play in the first cycle. So a lot there, but I guess starting with the idea that these teams had to play through the open qualifiers, I personally like to see it, being that it breaks up the season a little bit more and it kind of punishes them for not competing in the first cycle. What do you think?
Yeah, it's funny. I had this discussion with my roommate of when I found out that LGD got eliminated. So this is a topic that I am very passionate about because as a player who's got to go through a lot of open qualifiers and closed qualifiers in my day and coming up short sometimes, it's pretty demoralizing. And I just want to say that my goal from any qualifier is that the best competition gets in. And I think there has to be a balance. 3-4 years ago, the major tournaments would have, say 12 teams and 8 of them were invites. And I think that that's bad. I think that that's unhealthy for the scene because that doesn't allow anyone to prove themselves in order to make it through. But this year, or this specific set of qualifiers, they used to have 2 sets of opens. And I don't know exactly what happened, but there was only 1 set of opens. Mm-hmm. So you're telling me that a team like LGD is forced to go through opens, and then they lose 1 best of 1 and they're out, and their entire run at the major is gone because of 1 best of 1? To me, that's insane. That's insanity. To go from what we did, what I said 3 years ago, which was a problem, mm-hmm. to what it is now. I mean, I'm just not a believer in this idea that these teams should have to prove themselves over and over again. Yes, it was their choice to skip the last cycle, but Valve also gave them 2 weeks between TI and the next set of qualifiers. So it's I also think that's partially a problem with the system. If I was Valve, rather than being I'm going to punish these teams for not playing in the qualifier, wow, the 6 best teams in the world decided not to play our qualifier. Maybe we made it too early. Maybe it's us rather than the other team. And, there's arguments on both sides. I'm always, in general, as a player, or at least having formerly been a regular team or tournament participating player, I'm always going to side on the player side on a lot of these arguments. I just think quality of life wise, as a professional at the highest level, I can only imagine what it's like to be them. I can only tell you from my perspective, it's a grind, man. It can be miserable, and
Sure.
You just need to. It's almost like you're in a submarine when you're a professional Dota player, and you just don't really get to come up for air. You're just living in this isolated bubble where you're cut off from the outside world in a lot of ways because you're just playing so much Dota. Even for me, the last week I was planning on streaming yesterday, and I was streamed 10 to 12 hours every day because the new patch came out, more viewers, new stuff to try. And I realized I was holy crap, I need a breather. I just needed to take yesterday off because, I almost felt out of touch with reality. And I know that's why these players do it, because they know it even better than I do. And to have that be, I don't want to say punished, but all not encouraged to have in a life outside of Dota, I think is overall a bad system. And I'm adamantly against what is being promoted as the norm for competitive esports right now, and at least in Dota. So because I don't pay attention close enough to the other ones. So
yeah.
I know I had a long tidbit there, but definitely had a passionate response.
Well, so I guess a couple of responses to that. One being the idea that that was a topic that was brought up. It's a grind, and I completely understand that, and that is a discussion definitely that needs to be had, because I do agree the little bit of time in between, as you said, I guess it was 2 weeks, is a little ridiculous, especially coming off this massive Super Bowl-esque event in our case, the International. I will say, though, those teams were rewarded. They got paid literally millions of dollars for their placement at said TI, and as a conclusion, in a sense, to that season. A lot of these other teams, most of these other teams, were not rewarded because whether they just didn't place high enough or whatever, and I understand that means, for a lot of these teams, they didn't necessarily have to play TI right beforehand, but they too, it starts at the same time for everyone, and they're back at it again for a new season. So I guess for me, I'm not as sympathetic towards the players in that sense, but I do think that yes, the discussion should be had that more of a off season is certainly something that should be discussed, and possibly if it is a month long or whatever it's deemed to be, I am fine with that. But the players knew that wasn't going to be the case. I mean, and it goes to it as well, this idea they took it off. They also knew that a patch was coming. It's not like that was a secret either. They knew that a patch was coming. It was very likely going to happen after the first cycle finished. So when they took that first cycle off, they knew that there was a very, very, very good chance that they would have to play, in craziness. Obviously, they didn't know how big the patch would be, but it ended up being pretty big. And my last point is I do feel like it's almost a little results-oriented because of the fact that LGD did get knocked out. Yes, it's best of one, but I still would expect a team like LGD to be able to defeat a lesser tier team throughout these open qualifiers. They didn't have to play, Invictus, VG Gaming, whatever. Best of one, not necessarily how Dota should be played, but a team like that of that caliber.
Wasn't ideally, it just like a Magnus or something? Wasn't it some cheese pick or Meepo?
I believe so, yeah.
That's what I'm saying, though, is like Dota, like, if, for anyone at the highest level, they know that, like I've taken games off of tier 1 teams before, like with my tier 3 NA teams, like it happens, and then my point is overall, my overall emphasis is for the betterment of the scene. People want to watch the best competition possible, and you want the chance for there to be upsets, but you also want there to be within reason of like what that chance is. And I think that right now the balance is way too heavy against the tier 1 teams. Like in the past, like if you won a major, you just get invited to the next one. And it's like now if you win the major, that literally means nothing towards the next major cycle. Sure. Like I honestly think the top 3 at the previous major should just go to the next major. Like I think that's like, I personally would argue that much. And then you can like eliminate, one slot from like, instead of giving, by selection, China, Europe, and one other region a third slot, you just give everyone 2 slots and then you like let the top 3 teams come back. Like all I'm saying is that in general, like if you combine everything, like if you really think about it, if you combine everything, there is no break. If you slip up one day as like a tier 1 team, you're out of the next cycle. And that to me is not a good environment. Like that is not a positive. I want teams to be able to prove themselves, but it's just going to result in better Dota, I think, if your players are happy. It's like, I don't know how else to word it than like, obviously I'm not sympathetic in the sense of like, yeah, they made millions of dollars, like woe was them or whatever. I'm not thinking like woe was them. I want the scene to be as healthy as possible where we get all the best teams, all promoting the viewership. I want the players to be happy, the teams to be happy. And obviously if it's like Valve is sacrificing something to do that, it's a little bit different. But all we're asking for is, a slight like quality of life improvement for the schedule of the season, and I'm good to go. Like that's the thing that I think a lot of the players are so frustrated with. And like if your players are like complaining about the cycle, why is it being even worse now? Like I feel like people were complaining about the gruel, like the constant grueling of the schedule last year, and now it's even more. That's all, right? Like I completely agree with you on a lot of your points. I just want to emphasize that the reason why I'm so upset about it is because I think a lot of it's easily fixable or adjustable, and it's just like kind of just being neglected amongst like a lot of other things in Dota and Valve in general. So I've given my piece. Like I can see the other perspective. Like I think there's a lot of sides to this argument, and I just want to emphasize the player's perspective that even if they're making a lot of money, if they're not enjoying themselves, it's just going to be, when I say enjoying themselves, they're obviously working hard. Like we're talking quality of life things, if they're not happy to compete in tournaments regularly, that's just going to naturally be bad for the scene. And that's not what I want.
Yeah. All right, well, we can definitely continue the discussion, but it looks like iNSaNiA is ready to join us. So I'm going to bring him on.
Managed to bullshit long enough to buy time for that one.
There we go. We did it. Unfortunately, doesn't have a webcam. Okay, so, here we go. Oh, I did have to. There we go. I had to make a new call there. iNSaNiA, you there?
Yes, sir. How are you, man?
I'm doing good. How are you?
You asking me or him, man?
Well,
I'm good. Sorry?
Not you. I don't care about how you're doing. I'm caring about how iNSaNiA is doing. All right. Go ahead.
No, I'm good. I'm still at the boot camp. We were just playing some pubs, chilling. So, life's good right now.
Yeah, I bet it is. I mean, you guys undefeated in the major, the qualifiers there, qualifying for the major, obviously a pretty big deal. What was the reaction? Was it just like, oh my God, that was easier than expected? Or you think your practice has been paying off? What's the deal, man?
I mean, once we got home from China, we sat down and played a lot of pubs. Like, me and Mickey played like 17 games a day after the patch dropped. And I think, like, in some sense, like, we weren't really sure if our ideas were the best ideas, but we were confident that, we could execute them. So it felt pretty good going into the qualifier, despite, like, we played some scrims, which went terribly. I think we lost every scrim we played. But just because we played so much pubs, I think, like, I felt prepared for the games anyways. And it ended up working out, so.
How much of those pubs were together or solo queue? Like, how often do you guys party queue together?
Paired.
All of them were paired?
Yeah, like I queued with Mickey, Foxy queues with Tommy mostly, and then Max will queue with either one of us when it fits.
I see.
Yeah, so you almost always queue together. I think it's the easiest way to figure stuff out, because you still need to know what's good with each other, right?
So when you're like playing a new patch and you're like dual laning with your carry, like how many sample games do you think you would need to feel confident on like a specific lane setup being good or whatever?
I mean, I think it's hard to say. Like, it depends, because I mean, I think normally you go in with an idea. Like, for example, with this qualifier, we played a lot of Bristol Coddle, and I've been spamming it in pubs. And like, we had this idea that we thought it's good in the patch, and then we played it like maybe like 10 games, something like that. So I don't really know exactly, but I think some lanes are probably easier, harder. Bristol was also like a newer hero for Mickey, so it took a bit longer.
Do you guys feel like new patches suit your playstyle? Like I said previously before you got on that you guys are kind of a run and gun type of team, kind of flourish on outnumbering the opponent, kind of just creating a lot of chaos in the game plan. And I thought that new patches would be good for a team like yours because not everyone's as refined. And you guys, I don't want to say you're like not refined, but you don't have like a rigid playstyle,
Yeah, I get what you mean. No, I think so for sure. I think when teams are less coordinated or they start like when there's big shuffles and stuff, right? Where like kind of like coordination kind of resets a bit for a lot of these top teams. It's a lot easier to do, I think, what we do. So yeah, no, I agree with you. It's good for us.
I want to know your perspective as a captain. If you're just like going to this new patch and you're like, this is nice.
Yeah, I mean, it was nice. I really like the outpost. I think it's a cool mechanic that Dota was missing. So I really like that they added that. I mean, neutral items, I'm not really entirely sure how I feel about, but I feel like most of them aren't like so hugely impactful that they change like the game drastically, at least for the first like 30 minutes.
Yeah.
Dota's still Dota.
I think a lot of people looked at those neutral items and kind of like you said, right, they looked at the tier 4 and especially the tier 5 and are like, oh my God, this is broken, the most broken thing. But it's like, guys, this is, 70 plus minutes, I believe it is for tier 5, right? Like, you're never really going to have it. And by that time, it's probably for the better anyways if a game's going that long. So Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Being that, of course, myself and having iNSaNiA, we go back to a game called Heroes and Newer, so naturally have to talk about that as well. No, but Boxy did make a point in one of his tweets recently after you guys qualified that he feels like, coming from Han himself, this is a very Han-friendly patch, I believe, were the words that he used. You agree right there?
Yeah. I mean, I think I feel like every time, I don't know if you agree with this, but like every time they patch Dota, I just see more of Han in it.
Yeah.
So, no, I mean, yeah, for sure. It's a great advantage for us, I think, because it's like the game keeps speeding up. The heroes seem like generally like faster. They fixed like a lot of these turn rate stuff that were quite different from Han. So overall, Dota's have just been taking like moving in the same direction that I think Han did, where it's like faster gameplay, more reasons to fight or whatever, less farming creep.
No smackdowns though yet. Still waiting for those to come in.
Boxy's still spamming that taunt button. I don't know if you've noticed, but he's like non-stop taunting in everyone's lanes.
Of course he is. Classic Boxy.
Do you think they should add the option to mute taunts for the opponent? Like,
No.
I mean, I think probably you should be allowed to mute Boxy. Like that should just be something you can do. Like you just don't see his sets, you don't see his skins, you don't see anything that he does. You only see like this plain hero that he's playing.
Screw that, man. I love the mental games. They're awesome. You guys, of course, beat Alliance to qualify in the end. Now, Alliance obviously also qualified after defeating Nigma, but the fact that you had to beat Alliance to go to the Major, I know you guys have a rivalry there, of course. What did that mean? Were you extra happy to play them?
I actually think, like, for myself, I don't really think about it as a rivalry or anything. Like, most of the guys on that team are my friends, and, like, we have known them since Han, So I'm happy when they do well. I know my teammates, on the other hand, they love beating Alliance. I don't know if this is some, like, best in Sweden kind of thing.
Yeah.
Or, like, Kings of the North that we used to meme about before. So, no, I mean, they love playing Alliance and, getting to prove that we're better than them. Because I think it's, like, these close relationships with, like, Hanskin and Limp kind of has that thing going.
My overall question was, obviously, I talked to you very briefly towards the end of ESL, and you had a pretty now that you're having good results, I'll just say you had a pretty pathetic showing at ESL, and
we did.
Yeah, and I know you guys are aware of it, and I think that in Dota, it's very easy to get like in your own head, very easy to kind of psych yourselves out as a team. And overall, like, what do you think allowed you guys as a team to have like such a good mentality moving forward, and were able to kind of change it up so quickly in order to like figure your shit out? I guess would be my best description.
I mean, I hate to give Blitz credit for anything, but I think he was actually a big part of it. Where like,
I hate to give him credit too. I understand.
Yeah, I mean, I can't believe the words I'm about to say. No, but he really I think he picked us up and like he talked to us in a way where we understood, and like these losses I think actually kind of ended up helping us more than they hurt us, because losing ESL and losing Rotterdam, I think it made us realize like how bad we are compared to where we want to be, and then for the major we tried infinitely harder than I think we would have if we would have like swept those tournaments or done like placed in a like somewhat well where we're happy with our placement. So I think overall it ended up benefiting us to be there and not succeeding, I guess. Yeah,
coming from a player who's had, enough underwhelming showings to know how hard it can be on your mentality, I think it's like, for me, that's incredibly impressive just from a mental standpoint that you guys were able to like remain confident in what you were doing. Obviously had a pretty solid showing at the major, and now like if anything going through those qualifiers that you just had, like for me that's almost more impressive than the major was, just because you're obviously competing with the likes of 3 of the top teams in the world. So
yeah, no, I think a lot of credit goes to Will. No, I mean a lot of credit goes to Will. I think he played a big part in that.
Being a support player, I am curious how you feel about the having your own courier. How does that feel?
I mean, our team's biggest issue, I think, like in terms of like our relationships with each other, is mostly related to courier usage before.
Yeah, you talked about this. I actually forgot about this.
Yeah, like all of our problems are always like courier related, where it's like the off lane needs a courier, the mid lane needs a courier, safe lane needs a courier. So this has been a great change for us, and I feel like people aren't really on top of sniping couriers so much yet. So we use them quite freely, but it'll be interesting once I think people try to figure out like some kind of meta game around it, where you have these Furions or bounty hunters or whatever running around trying to kill couriers.
You got the holidays coming up. Are you going to be taking a holiday break, or are you guys going to keep grinding for the major?
So we have another LAN before the year ends in Singapore.
That's right, yeah.
Wait. Is that announced?
Yeah, that came out, yeah.
Okay, it is announced. All right.
I'll see you there, buddy.
Yeah, BSJ is going to be there. That's right. I saw that.
Awesome. Yeah, so we're doing that. And then after that, we're taking a little bit of a break. But then pretty much straight after New Year's, I think like 5th or 7th, somewhere around then, we're going to start scrimming again. So not too much of a break, but just enough to reset a bit.
Yeah, it's coming up, man, and obviously wish you the best of luck. I do got to ask, as cheesy of a question as it may be, but your expectations going into this next major. I mean, it's obviously even more competition now with teams like Secret competing. What are your expectations?
I mean, I think expectations top 16 would be nice.
Okay.
But I mean,
yeah, so show up, you'll be good, yeah.
Hopefully, yeah. No, but hopefully, like, we can aim for top 4.
Okay. Fair enough. Yeah. Of course, the end goal, TI 10 being in Sweden. That's a pretty cool feeling. What was your reaction when you heard about that?
Honest thoughts. I mean, I don't really see Stockholm as like a TI city.
Huh.
But I mean, it's Valve, right? So I'm sure they'll figure something out and make it amazing, just like all the other TIs. It's cool to be able to have all your friends there and family and stuff. So
yeah,
in that way, it's really nice.
That's what I would think. Yeah, being able to have it so close, pretty cool feeling.
Yeah.
All right, man. BSJ, anything else?
Nah, man, I've gotten to talk to my boy iNSaNiA as much as I could ask for.
All right. We've had enough of you, apparently, now. Thank you for joining us, though, as always. Always a pleasure to talk with you, man. Any shout-outs you want to make?
Shout out to Team Liquid for taking care of us and believing in us, even though we were ass in the start. So shout out to Blitz. He's a great coach and a great dude to have in your team. So once he ditches us, future teams, I recommend them highly.
All right.
And yeah, that's it.
All right. Really do appreciate you coming on, man. I know it's really early in the morning for you. I'm sure it sounds like you've been grinding some Dota, though. Not surprising. But thank you. Thank you for joining us, man.
Yeah, no worries. Anytime.
Yeah, good luck in the upcoming major, man.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
See ya.
Bye.
All right, iNSaNiA, of course, captain and support player for Team Liquid. It does feel it's still, I don't know. I'm still kind of getting used to that myself. The idea that it's Team Liquid now, not Alliance anymore. But obviously, it's come a long way, and it is cool to see the success. There's a little bias there. Again, I go back with a lot of the players, but hey, it still is a long season ahead. So it's a fun start. We'll see how they keep that momentum up. I am hopeful though with how they perform, certainly in the qualifiers.
Yeah, I've like randomly run into obviously previous Alliance, now Liquid. I've ran into them at a lot of like random events compared to a lot of other teams. For whatever reason, my interaction with them is much higher. Like Dota Summit was a big one just because that's much more of a like close-knit tournament, playing a bunch of ping pong against them and stuff. So I know these guys pretty well for the short time that I've interacted with them, and they're just a bunch of good guys, man. Every time I talk about them, I'll just say they're a bunch of good dudes, and I will always root for them. So I thoroughly enjoy their approach to Dota, their outlook on life in general, and I think that there's a reason why they're able to have the positive. Like, I really focused on the mentality for them just because they're. I can't imagine how much pressure there is accompanied with having that poor of a result to start the season. And then representing an organization like Liquid, right? There's just so much pressure that comes with that. And to be able to make such a drastic shift in results is beyond impressive to me. I know I said it to iNSaNiA, and I'll just say it again, that is nothing to scoff at. And they're just the type of team where if you don't know them well, start paying attention, because they are just so much fun to root for. They're a fun team to watch. They do their own shit. Like they kind of just feel themselves out and don't really care what anyone else is doing. And in my opinion, those are the funnest teams to really get behind and follow closely. So always rooting for them.
What better time to do it than right now as well, with the massive patch hitting, certainly. So yeah, and as you touched on there, I mean, the one thing that does stand out to me for iNSaNiA specifically as that captain role compared to a lot of others is just his always cheery attitude. He's always upbeat despite going through some rough patches there, at least from when I've talked with him. Behind the scenes with just the team, who knows? But definitely my experience, I can reiterate that as well. Always fun, joyful to be around, and good to see their success. So, okay, back to the major qualifiers. So, talked a bit about Europe, of course, and led into that iNSaNiA interview. But all the other regions definitely had their talking points as well. Starting with Southeast Asia. Now, Southeast Asia was Okay, this is one region, also South America had a similar circumstance where in Southeast Asia, TNC, they won the last major. You figure, okay, they're going to be good to go. Boy, was it close. They had to go to a third game in an elimination match to ultimately qualify for the major after going 2-1-1 in the group stages. They actually went 0-2 against Reality Rift, which is one of the teams that ended up qualifying. Reality Rift, a team with the likes of Drew, Alacrity, KYXY, Hustla, and Nuts. Yes, there's some recognizable players there, but certainly not a team you would expect to 2-0 TNC. Again, I go back to new patch, sure, but just talking results right here, they had to go to a game 3 against Signal Ultra as a team name. And then there was an unfortunate circumstance in the third game where they were up, it was something like 10,000 hours, so that they had a lead, but then Signal Ultra all of a sudden DC'd. Their whole team just literally DC'd from the game. They waited a good 15 minutes, even a little bit longer than the allotted time, which is technically 10 minutes, and you're allowed to unpause. They still didn't come back. And it got to a point where the admin made the call, and that's a whole other topic. But point is, they unpaused the game. They finished from there. They qualified. So we had a little bit of drama there. But, first, really, the fact that TNC had to go to the very wire just to qualify for a major, crazy in itself. Fnatic and Reality Rift, the other two teams to join them. But what were your thoughts on TNC and barely getting there?
The main thing I want to emphasize to the average viewer who, it's hard to keep up with the nuances and the specifics of professional Dota is this new type of patch. How much does it highlight the fact that how important team coordination is? Because the difference in skill level between tier 1 players and like tier 2, tier 3 players really isn't that high. Like, yes, it's there, right? But it's overcomable by pure skill. And what separates these tier 1 teams from tier 2, tier 3 teams is team coordination, their ability to like be their full potential as a unit, right? To synergize their item timings, to like know their role in the game as a unit. And that's what really makes the defining difference. And you can see that when a new patch comes out and that refinedness of the tier 1 teams just isn't there yet, obviously, that these tier 2, tier 3 teams can actually beat them. Like it's, it just shows how important team coordination is in Dota. And a team like TNC, at the end of the day, they are a relatively new team. And yeah, even though they're a new team last patch as well, last patch was very figured out. So that definitely kind of caters to a new team being more organized. And it just shows, man, like I don't really worry that much about TNC. I think SCA region overall is very high skill. And I think at the beginning of a patch, skill is much more important than it is towards the end of a patch, where teams are much more coordinated, organized, refined in their strategy. I just keep saying those words because at the highest level, everyone's good. It comes down to who is the best together. And that's why sometimes when you see a team like Liquid last year, now Team Nigma, when they replace Matumba Man, who's clearly a world-class player, they go from getting underwhelming results to getting second place at TI. And that just comes down to how the cogs fit together. And during a new patch, the cogs just aren't going to fit together all that well. Like, they're just not. Everyone's kind of like figuring their own crap out. Maybe you all think there's 5 good carry heroes, 5 good offlaners, but you don't really know how they go well together, when they go well together, like who does what in the game, that kind of stuff. So, I think that's the major takeaway from me for a team like TNC, and the fact that they got through. The last comment I want to make is that tournament organizers, when it comes to like rules and pauses, they like leave it up in the team's hands to unpause the game. To have some damn rules and unpause the game yourself, tournament organizers. Like, March should not have to feel like a bad person for pushing the button. You know what I mean? Like, that's been around since the beginning of time. Like, what's wrong with you, tournament organizers? Like, just take some responsibility, put a hard rule in the book, and if there's 15 minutes of pause in a game and it hits 15 minutes, the other team should not have a choice of whether or not to unpause. Like, why is it like a moral question for TNC to unpause the game or not? Like, that's just so beyond crazy to me, right? Like,
yeah.
That's just stupid. That's a whole nother story, and I'm gonna, if you want to comment on that, you can. I'm gonna leave it there.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have my take. I actually, just to reiterate my tweet that I sent shortly after it happened, in fact, in real time, I basically made the point, again, admins are the most thankless job in all of esports. I've said that before. They only are in the spotlight when drama arises, unfortunately, and that's just part of the job, though. It's like referees in traditional sports. That's going to be the case. I mean, but you take the job, you know that is the case, and you do your part to make sure that you're not in that situation. It can happen sometimes, I understand that. But yes, the wording he used was, if you want to unpause, you can unpause the game. And the fact that, as you're pointing out, you're giving the player, you're basically putting it on the player, the team, whatever, to make a decision to be this quote-unquote bad guy, I've never been a fan of. I absolutely disagree with it to say it like that. As you say, I don't know about just straight up unpausing the game, but making a point, being like, okay, it's been 10 minutes, we are going to unpause the game, please unpause the game, something like that. So, but just make sure to not put it in the player's hands, because when you do that, then, and there was backlash. There was other players on other teams that were calling out the TNC players, saying, come on, guys, why did you do that, in their own words. And that's what happens when the admin, unfortunately, leaves it in the player's hands. So
I get, okay, if people aren't aware, rules are like 90% of rules are made because somebody broke it at some point, or like somebody abused the system and they're like, well, shit, like, we don't want that to happen again. Make a rule. It's like, how many times has a team DC'd, right? Like, that's happened countless times in the history of Dota. Like, I understand if this was like a first time thing where, tournament organizers never had to deal with it. I don't think the admin should be like the bad guy either. There should just be a rule in the book every time something like this happens where it's like, oh, like, okay, this happened with TNC. That's a shitty spot to ever have to put a team in. Let's make a rule from here on out where if this were to happen again, this is how it's ruled, no questions asked. Yeah. And it's just like, that's the problem, right? I don't think there should be a bad guy. There should be a rule going in where, like, nobody has a choice. If this happens, you're out.
You're saying Valve needs to make a rule book for DPC? Like, that's a silly thought, BSJ.
The funny thing is it should be Valve, but it doesn't even have to be Valve. Like, if a big organization that's running a tournament has this happen and they lay down a law about it, most likely other organizations are going to adopt it or like tweak it to themselves, but they'll make a rule as well. It's just an overall problem that people can have stuff like this happen and rules aren't immediately put in place to prevent it from ever happening again. That's my emphasis, is that if something like a travesty like this happens, like, how many times does this have to happen before somebody makes an official ruling so that it never happens again? This has happened like 10 times. It's like, at what point do we have to stop discussing, is TNC the bad guy? Is the admin the bad guy? Did Signal get like screwed over? Like, how about the rule says this, that happened, like, sucks to be Signal that they DC'd, but like, that's what the rule says. So it can't happen. It does suck that they DC'd, but they will be able to try to make it back in the minor quals. It's always just unfortunate. I said it's unfortunate when qualifier setups make it so that not the best teams have a chance to go through, in this case, LGD. I also think it's also a travesty when teams have stuff like this happen to them, but that's reality. It's going to happen sometimes. Sucks, but that's, as long as there was a rule put in place, I would say it's an acceptable, unfortunate circumstance.
Yeah.
But now it's like a tragedy. Go ahead.
Back to the talking point of just TNC in general, and again, the fact that they had to squeak by here, and like I said, that they had a good lead at that point. So yes, were they likely going to win? Sure, but you never really know, and it is unfortunate for everyone. But back to the team's success itself, and I understand that yes, they are in the major, but this is kind of leaning towards what I talked about post last major. And yes, TNC won the last major, but as I was very passionate about, and I still kind of am, in the sense that I don't know if I see TNC as a team that I have high expectations for the rest of this season. I really don't, and this is already kind of seeing that, a new patch and everything, sure, but they're all very, very, very skilled players, but when it comes to playing as a team together against the top caliber talent at these international events, that's where I am the most concerned. The fact that they were down 1-0 against a tier 2, tier 3 team from Southeast Asia is very concerning to me. So
I agree. You're not wrong.
Yeah. Obviously, yeah. We'll see how that continues to play out throughout the season, but just to make that point again. One last thing before we leave Southeast Asia real quickly. Again, there were three spots, and we talked last week, and the idea how many spots each regions were going to get. We kind of went back and forth a little bit, but I can't say I saw this coming, but it's clearly the fact that TNC won it, so Valve made the decision that Southeast Asia should get 3 spots. On top of that, Adroit, the other team that qualified for the major last time around, they actually finished last in their group, by the way, so they didn't even contest, unfortunately, for them. But 3 spots for Southeast Asia. Again, I'm not personally a big fan. I still would have rather seen it ultimately perhaps in NA, but that was a decision made. They gave it to them. And thus Reality Rift, Fnatic, the other team, and then TNC.
I like overall that they made it so that the regions that got 3 slots to the major got 1 to the minor, and then they gave NA, I believe, as well as CIS 2 slots to the minor. I think that's like a pretty good compromise. I already said I thought China should just get 4 slots to the major, but I thought that was pretty extreme. I didn't think they would actually do that. So overall, like, you have a close call. If a team deserves to go to the major, they'll win the minor. It's like, easier. It's not as ideal as I make it sound, but I don't think NA or SCA drastically deserves the slot more than the other. So I think there could be an argument either way. And since it's a judgment call that they made as close as possible, they made it so one team gets the extra slot to the minor, one region gets the slot to the minor, one gets the slot to the major. Mm-hmm. I'm okay with that. Like, that's an acceptable final decision in my book.
Oh yeah, even just the top 2 teams for the minor, I still think I like that idea the most. Actually, you finish top 2 at the minor, then you go rather than
I like that
3rd spot to Southeast Asia. So, anyways. There you go. That's how it played out in Southeast Asia. Moving to some other regions. China, not much to talk about here, just the results quickly. Invictus, Vici, and then Team Aster were the 3 teams to qualify for the major. Again, all 3 were at the previous one. Invictus through the minor last time, but clearly they have found their groove, and they're looking very good right now, finishing with Vici Gaming as a top 2 spot out of China. Any thoughts there?
Nope, just travesty to not see LGD even in the close qualifiers, but, that's life.
That's true.
Other than that, like you said, pretty expected.
Moving on to let's jump over to CIS. We got CIS. Now, CIS was actually kind of interesting because you had 2 teams, Virtus Pro and Na'Vi, qualifying out of CIS, and technically both of these teams didn't even play in last cycle's minor or major because they didn't qualify, kind of. Virtus Pro did qualify for the minor, but of course they dropped out, and there was a little bit of that discussion we had there, but they played this time around. They got the top spot. Na'Vi ended up beating Spirit in the elimination match to also claim a spot. So we're back to the good old days of Na'Vi and VP being back for CIS here.
Yeah, I was pretty surprised at Na'Vi's results last round, so I'm happy to, like, based on their roster alone, I think they have like a pretty impressive group there. I believe they made 1 replacement going into this one, right? Going from first set of major.
Ilias. Ilias joined their support player.
Yeah, I think they replaced their captain, if I recall correctly.
Overall, benched,
overall, I think that team looked very impressive and was underwhelming in the first run. So, VP, same idea. I think they are a better roster than they were letting on to. I also just think they were ironing out the kinks of being a new team, obviously Rezo in a new position. And overall, if you look at the CIS region, their roster is the most impressive. So it's not exactly surprising at this point. Look forward to seeing how they actually do in the major itself now that they're going to get the chance. That's the major deal for me. I'm not surprised at all that they qualified, but I could easily see them being a contender or just a flop going into the next major.
Yeah, we'll have to see once we have that all coming and previewing it and everything. But yeah, I mean, my initial reaction is I do not have high expectations. I continue to feel that CIS in general, it's the most chaotic region. There's going to be new teams every single cycle that qualify, and we had that case here for really the major at least, and we'll see about the minor. So that's how CIS is turning out. Europe. We already talked about that. That's right. So Europe is good to go. No point to go over that again. North America leads us to there. And do we have a result?
Yeah, CG took 2-0 over Fighting Pandas, yeah.
Okay, so as we mentioned at the beginning of the show, when we were recording this, EG was up 1-0 against Fighting Pandas. Now, a couple storylines here, one being that where EG actually got dropped down to the lower bracket by Fighting Pandas. They lost in a 3-game series, and then they ended up, of course, getting revenge. They had to defeat NIP and then Fighting Pandas once again to qualify. So it was close. They almost got knocked out of the minor, but they did indeed qualify. They joined Chaos. Chaos looked amazing these qualifiers. Talk about a resurgence for them. Now, of course, they did get a new offlane player, DM, who is, I saw people in chat, saying even like, who's this DM guy? He's kind of been he's a high ladder player in the European region. He's been on a couple of teams. He's played mid role, I know, in the past as well. He likes to play some funky heroes even. So clearly he fit well with the team, and they only dropped 1 game throughout the whole qualifiers themselves. So they looked good.
I played 1 pub with him. He's a very vocal guy, and he seems to know his shit. You can tell pretty quickly when a player knows more than you about the game just by the way they talk about things, the way they view the game. I played 1 pub with him, and I was like, yeah, this guy knows. He knows Dota. He was a very impressive player just from playing 1 pub with him, and I think most notably he's very vocal. And I know Yawar is not very vocal, and I think that CCNC is vocal when his hero is supposed to be the one doing stuff. So I like most likely for their roster, I have to imagine that having a nice vocal offlaner is a big deal. I think that was probably a big hindrance for them when they had Sumail and Yawar on the same team. As far as I know, both of them are very quiet on average. And I think that obviously Saberlight was just a trial period. I thought this team looked amazing at the start of the season. Their roster, obviously the core MSS, as well as CCNC, I think for me is they've just been powerhouses in the NA region as players, placing top 8 or so at TI the last 2 years. I overall, I guess they got 12th this year. But overall, I look forward to seeing this team as the season goes on. I was very excited them at the start of the season, was like, wow, what happened after, the first set of qualifiers? They're kind of the same as VP for me, excited to see them, went through a little bit of a bump, had to sort things out, whether it's getting used to new positions, replacing one player or whatever. And here they are back. So kind of like VP, Na'Vi, Chaos, all those teams kind of tell the same tale for me. And I think it doesn't really mean they're better than EG yet because they didn't have to play EG. Just the fact that EG kind of fluked a series against Fighting Pandas. I want to be very clear. For anyone who didn't watch the last series of EG versus Fighting Pandas, that series was a joke. EG just looked above and beyond better than Fighting Pandas in that specific series. I unfortunately didn't get to see the series where Fighting Pandas beat them, but EG pretty much just stomped them for 2 games in a row, not even close. So that to me, I have to believe is kind of a fluke of the patch, the first series, and obviously EG coming back. Yeah, they did have that little bit of a scare, but the fact that they came back and just crushed them says a lot about their quality of play. And overall, I think the 2 best teams in NA got the slots, and now it's going to boil down to, I think you have Fighting Pandas and you have J-Storm. Who's the an NIP? I think it's going to be very, very fun to see who gets the 2 slots for the minor.
Yeah, that's again, they do get 2 slots for the minor, but only 2 of those teams can make it. And so you brought up NIP. I mean, obviously J-Storm's another interesting talking point too. By the way, they finished 3rd place in their groups behind Fighting Pandas and Chaos. I mean, that's a tough group though, to be fair. So there was that. So yeah, they're going to play in the minor qualifiers. I'm going to give a take on NIP, and I'm curious what you think about it yourself, but. We're sitting here talking about these teams that took off the first cycle and thus had to play in the open qualifiers. In my opinion, if you go from one region to another willingly, you should have to play in the open qualifiers because that's almost the same thing to me. You literally are making the choice to just go from one region to the other. How is that fair to the other teams in there? In a sense, you took that first cycle off from that region. I feel like they should have had to play in the open qualifiers. So when I even saw them playing from NA, I was like, oh, that's just like a lot of people. It's like, wait a second, they're in NA. They were playing at the Complexity headquarters, from my understanding there. They were helping them out, actually. So, but I think they should have had to play through the open qualifiers. They didn't. They did get invited. But considering how everything else has played out, I don't think that was necessarily the most fair.
You did your rhetorical spiel earlier, the brief thing, I'll say, are you telling me there's inconsistencies and unfairness in the process of something Valve related? No way. I'm in agreement. Like, it's the same subject. Like, if you weren't in the region, why do you just inherit a spot for that region? It's not like what NIP did last cycle was exactly impressive, and now they're in a new region. I agree. Like, there's just no consistency. I don't have a problem with any individual ruling so far. I have a problem with the overall consistency and reliability of the system. Like, as a player, as an organization, I don't feel like, it's kind of similar when you're in a Dota game and you have a hero on your team. It's like, I have a gyrocopter. I'm thinking this hero is going to mid-game team fight, and he's eventually going to scale with these items. It's like, there's a lot to be said about knowing what to expect, and like knowing reliably this is what that hero is going to do. And I feel like a lot of things in Dota tie into real life. I feel like when you are operated by a rule system, you should have some idea, not perfect, but some idea of what that system's going to entail. Like, what is it going to look like? And I feel like with Dota and overall the system that Valve's implemented, there's so many times where we'll talk to players in these interviews, or we'll just talk to players in general, and they'll just be like, yeah, we don't know, we'll see. Like, the first time we talked to CCNC and we were theory crafting how many slots there are, and he's like, is that confirmed? Is that a thing? Like, I don't know. How do you know?
We don't.
So, like, why is that the tone that a player has to have?
Yeah,
like,
true.
the healthy level of skepticism that a player is required to have, because the system is just so all over the place.
Yeah.
We could go on for hours about that, but that's my overall issue. I'm in agreement that that's just yet another inconsistency.
Yeah.
In the process.
Well, again, they did play it as an invited team, and like I said, they're now going to be the minor qualifiers coming up. So minor is certainly going to be competitive in NA, as most regions, I'm sure. Last region to talk about, South America. I think arguably the two expected teams, Beast Coast and Pain Gaming. Of course, Unknown was the team that qualified last time, so I guess you could be a little surprised about them. They ended up not getting out of their group even. They didn't even get to the minor qualifier. So Unknown having a bit of a hiccup here this time around. They'll have to wait for next cycle. But Pain joining Beast Coast. Now, to be fair, Beast Coast had to go to the lower bracket. They were knocked out by Pain down there. So Pain was the first team to qualify, but then Beast Coast qualified as well. So not much else to say about SA, but anything from your side?
Yeah, those two teams just look heaps and bounds above the others. I think what defines most regions in terms of caliber is the tier 3 teams in that region. I think NA and SA for the most part are the weakest regions, and like somebody in chat even mentioned how bad the open qualifiers for NA were. Honestly, like the top 2 SA teams, not all that bad. Top 3 NA teams, really not all that bad. But like once you take off, after you get past the top 5 NA teams, it's literally garbage. Like that's part of the reason why I've kind of like stopped playing in NA. It's like, no offense to these teams, like who name the 6th best team in NA?
Solado.
No offense. Like, compare that to the 6th best team in Europe, or 6th best team in SCA.
I hear you.
6th best team in the SCA is taking games off TNC, right? The 6th best team in NA will never beat EG in a series, like not a single time ever. Like that's just never going to happen. Same thing with SA. I think SA is the weakest region on average, and so instead of 5 good teams, it's 2. And after that, the drop off is just significant, and I think that's where you can kind of define a region is how good like the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th best teams are. In NA and SA for the most part, it's kind of a joke. So
yeah, and we're talking about inconsistencies. This point is being brought up in chat real quick with SA, and that Pain and Beast Coast actually were in the same group. That's actually surprising. They were both in Group A, and Beast Coast had 1-3-0 record. They actually had to play a tiebreaker match to even get to the major qualifier.
Beast Coast is a weird team, man. They were also like going to beat IG in the major, and they were up by 20,000 gold or whatever, and then lost 2 minutes later. So, that's Beast Coast for you.
Anything can happen, I suppose, especially with this patch. That's kind of the theme of the show and these major qualifiers. The patch, anything can happen. All right, I think we've had a good show, though. Did our part covering the major qualifiers. Of course, we do have the minor coming up, and we don't necessarily need to preview much more than that. We'll talk about how it all ends up in next week's podcast, of course. But I believe we're good to start wrapping up. So, BSJ, as always, anything else before we do?
Nah, man. I'm honestly glad we pushed it back a little bit this week, just so we could talk a bit more about the results of the qualifiers, and looking forward to seeing the final, how it all plays out in the minor. I think there's a decent amount of variance in some of these regions when it comes down to who's going to qualify for the minor. Looking forward to seeing Nigma. Looking forward to seeing how NA plays out, especially, and that's always good, to think that the minor qualifiers are also going to be interesting. I think that's important for the health of the scene and overall the entertainment value. And always having good teams go to the minor, I think, is really exciting as well, because fact is, viewers watch for the teams rather than the actual Dota. Like the quality of Dota in terms of spectator sport is just that much higher when you have teams like Enigma and stuff like that. So
yep,
I'm happy.
It's great news for WePlay. Of course, they're getting their first DPC event, and excited that they are. They definitely deserve it, and we'll see what kind of show they put on eventually at the minor itself. But of course, it qualifies as we're recording the show. Starts tomorrow. In fact, technically later tonight for the China region, and over the next couple of days. So definitely look forward to that and into the weekend here. As far as myself, again, as we mentioned at the beginning of the show, both myself and BSJ happen to be going to Montreal. You're going to be competing at WBSG. I'm going to be watching and talking about your play and criticizing it. That's what I do as a caster.
You'll be nice, I'm sure.
Very nice, not really. I'll try to hold Tsunami back, though. But no, that is going to do it for our Wombo Combo podcast, episode number 9, I want to say. Anyways, we're still going, and we plan to keep going. We are getting up. They're almost at double digits when it comes to our shows. And again, I feel like this is just the beginning. Obviously, still earlier on in the DPC season. So hopefully you guys enjoyed a Wednesday night show. We'll be back next week. Until then, ladies and gentlemen, have a good night. We'll see you then. Thanks again to iNSaNiA, by the way, for joining us as well.